A pale frost covered the prairie that morning, thin as breath on glass, quiet as a prayer. The sun hadn't yet warmed the soil, and the world seemed caught between night and waking. Out near the edge of town stood Eli Cartwright, a man whose coat was patched more than whole, whose hands bore the rough script of labor and loneliness. Folks said he was cursed with kindness, too gentle for the hard years the frontier demanded. They said he'd lost his wife to fever, his cattle to drought, and his will somewhere in between. But still, he rose every dawn, hat in hand, eyes fixed on the light as though waiting for it to forgive him. That morning, he rode into town for the livestock auction, not because he had money to spend, but because old habits die slower than hope. The square was alive with noise, boots scraping dust, voices sharp as nails, laughter slicing through the cold. The air smelled of hay and whiskey and the restless sweat of animals. Beside the corral, Jed Tanner, the richest cattleman for miles, barked orders at his men. His coat was new, his boots clean, and his smirk the kind that made a poor man's jaw tighten. Eli kept to the edges, silent. The auctioneer stood on a crate, calling out bids that rose like gunfire. $10, $20, $30 to the man in the red vest. Horses shifted nervously, ropes creaked, the crowd murmured. And then came a lull. From the far end of the corral, a boy let out a small, trembling foal, more bone than flesh, her legs shaking with each step. Her mother had died the night before, and the stable hands hadn't bothered to clean the dirt from her coat. The crowd groaned. The auctioneer laughed under his breath. 50 cents, he called, half joking. That's what she's worth. Anyone got more pity than sense. The silence was sharp enough to cut. Then someone chuckled. Tanner, of course. You'd have to be half dead yourself to take that thing home. Eli's gaze lingered on the foal. Her eyes were too big for her face, and yet they held something fierce, something refusing to die. His heart, long trained to stay quiet, stirred. He reached for his coin pouch, nearly empty, and lifted his hand. I'll take her, he said simply. Laughter followed him like dust in the wind. The auctioneer shrugged. Sold, to the fool with 50 cents and no fence worth mending. Eli took the rope and led the foal away as the crowd went on laughing. From the porch of the feed store, Clara May Hollister watched. Her apron was dusted with flour, her hair pinned in a way that caught the sun. She didn't laugh. She just stood there, her eyes softening with something like sorrow. As Eli passed, she called quietly, "Hold on a moment." She disappeared inside and returned with a small bottle of milk, corked and wrapped in cloth. "You'll need this more than pride," she said, holding it out. Eli hesitated, then took it. His voice was rough when he answered. "Much obliged, Miss Hollister." "Clara," she corrected, her tone low. "You take care of that little one." The foal stumbled beside him as he walked out of town, her tiny hooves catching in the dirt. Behind him, voices rose again. "Cartwright's gone soft in the head. That thing'll be dead by sunrise." He kept walking. The land stretched wide and bare, colored with the last light of day. By the time he reached his ranch, if one could call it that, dusk had fallen. The fence leaned tiredly against the wind, and the barn door hung crooked. Inside, the air smelled of hay and memory. Eli spread an old blanket in a corner and laid the foal down gently. She was shivering, eyes half-lidded, breath shallow. He lit the lantern and knelt beside her, whispering as though afraid to wake the silence. "You're safe now, little sparrow," he murmured. "Reckon we both been left behind." The name came easy, Sparrow, small, fragile, but made for flight. That winter was cruel. Snow came early and heavy, smothering the fields. Eli chopped firewood till his hands cracked, bartered his last saddle for feed, and kept Sparrow alive with that bottle of milk Clara had given him. He'd sit by the fire, the foal's head resting in his lap, whispering nonsense to keep her awake. Weeks passed, then months. The townsfolk gossiped. "Cartwright's feeding a corpse. You can't raise life from loss." But every dawn, he'd wake to the sound of sparrows stirring, weak, but alive. Sometimes Clara would visit, saying she was checking on supplies. She always brought something small, a jar of oats, a sack of hay, and lingered by the barn door watching him work. Their conversations were short, their silences longer. She'd ask, "How's she doing?" And he'd answer, "Still fighting." When she left, her scent, lavender and sawdust, stayed in the air like a promise he didn't dare name. Point one morning in early spring. Eli stepped outside and found Sparrow standing taller, her coat shining in the new light. The frost was gone, the world humming again. He opened the gate, and she took off running, legs still uncertain, but fast, faster than he'd ever seen her move. She kicked up dust that caught the sun and turned it gold. Eli laughed, really laughed, for the first time since the fever took his wife. "Look at you, girl," he said softly. "You're something, ain't you?" It was a quiet joy, the kind that seeps in slow and stays. But peace in the West never lasts long. That afternoon, 3 of Tanner's men rode up, hard-faced and mean with self-importance. The lead one dismounted, spat in the dirt, and said, "Cartwright, your runt wandered onto Tanner land last night. Trampled his winter crop. You'll pay damages or hand her over." Eli stood still, the wind tugging at his coat. "You're mistaken," he said evenly. "She's never left my pasture." The man sneered. "Ain't for you to say. Tanner'll send the sheriff tomorrow." When they rode off, Eli looked out at the horizon, Sparrow grazing by the fence, the sky turning red behind her, and felt the ache of old helplessness press against his chest. But then Sparrow lifted her head and looked back at him, ears twitching, as if to say, "Don't you bow to them again." That he drew a breath, steady and deep. "You'll have to come through me first," he whispered, voice low but unshakable. And with that, the sun slipped below the line of the earth, leaving the ranch in shadows, the quiet before the fight, the stillness before the miracle. Rain fell in thin, silver lines that night, a quiet sorrow from the sky. Eli sat in the barn beside Sparrow, the lantern burning low, shadows flickering across the wood. The foal had grown taller now, her coat sleek, her eyes bright with trust. But tomorrow, Sheriff Amos Reed would ride out to settle Jed Tanner's claim, and Eli knew what that meant. He had no money, no backing, no power. The law, like the weather, favored the man with the bigger hat and deeper pockets. Sparrow nuzzled against his shoulder, soft and warm. He ran his hand along her neck, whispering, "Maybe I was a fool to think we could change our luck. But you made this place feel alive again." Outside, thunder grumbled across the hills. The rain on the roof was a steady hymn. Then came the sound of boots, slow, careful, and the barn door creaked open. Clara May stepped in, her cloak soaked, a basket clutched in her hands. "I heard Tanner means to strip you of her," she said softly. "He's calling it law, but we both know it's cruelty." Eli looked up, weary but not broken. "Ain't much I can do, Clara. Man can only fight so many times before the world stops listening." She set the basket down, cornbread, wrapped in cloth, still warm. "Don't you dare give up. Not after all this." Her hand brushed his, a quiet, trembling touch. For a moment neither moved. The air between them felt thick, like time itself had slowed. She looked at him the way dawn looks at night, not to judge it, but to promise light will come again. "You'll find a way," she whispered. "I believe in you." When she left, he sat long into the night, the rain easing into silence. Her words hung in the air, fragile but steady. "I believe in you." By morning, the world was washed clean. Sheriff Reed arrived, hat dripping, and told Eli that Tanner would drop his claim if Eli paid $200 in damages. $200. It might as well have been the moon. But before despair could take hold, Reed cleared his throat and said, "There's talk the territory horse trials are open again this spring. Big prize money this time. Word is, anyone can enter." Eli's eyes lifted. "Anyone? Anyone with a horse," Reed replied, mounting up. "You've got one worth something, if she's half as fast as she looks." When he rode off, the idea stayed. By nightfall, it was a spark he couldn't smother. The weeks that followed turned hard work into prayer. Eli built a makeshift track around his pasture, mended the fence, ran Sparrow at dawn and dusk. Dust rose behind her like wings, each stride stronger, swifter. She wasn't bred for glory, but she had heart. And sometimes, heart outruns bloodlines. Clara came often, pretending to check on supplies, but really to stand at the fence and watch. She'd smile when Sparrow ran past, hair catching the sun, and Eli would feel something shift inside him, a quiet warmth, like spring finally finding its way back through frost. When the morning of the race arrived, the whole town gathered at the fairgrounds. The track was ringed with wagons, the air thick with the scent of sweat and dust and excitement. Tanner stood near the front, his stallion gleaming black as sin. When Eli led Sparrow out, laughter rippled through the crowd. "That scrawny thing?" Tanner drawled. "You plannin' to walk her cross the finish line?" Eli said nothing. He just patted Sparrow's neck. "Let's show 'em, girl." The gunshot cracked. Dust exploded. Hooves thundered. The field blurred with motion. Sparrow started slow, finding her rhythm, legs slicing through the wind. Tanner's rider took the lead early, his stallion kicking dirt in her face. But Sparrow didn't falter. She ran low and lean, each breath a heartbeat of defiance. Halfway through, Tanner's man swung wide, trying to block her path. Sparrow stumbled, gasped from the crowd, and Eli's chest clenched. Then, with a wild toss of her head, she surged forward again, cutting through open space, her mane flashing gold in the sunlight. Eli whispered through the roar of the crowd, "Come on, little Sparrow. Show him who you are." At the final stretch, time seemed to slow, the crowd a blur, the dust turning to light. Sparrow stretched forward, muscles trembling, and crossed the finish line by the narrow width of a breath. Silence fell, then the stands erupted. Eli stood frozen. Tanner cursed and turned away. Sheriff Reed tipped his hat with the faintest smile. Clara covered her mouth, tears glinting in her eyes. Eli walked to Sparrow, laid a hand on her neck, and said softly, "You did it, girl. You did it." He didn't raise his arms or shout victory. He just looked at her the way a father looks at a child, proud, astonished, grateful beyond words. The prize money paid every debt he had. For the first time in years, the Cartwright Ranch was truly his. He fixed the fence, rebuilt the barn, planted grass where the soil had gone barren. The neighbors stopped whispering and started tipping their hats when he passed. Months later, Sparrow's name spread beyond the county. A wild miracle horse that came from nothing. A breeder from Kansas rode in one evening, offering a fortune, $1 million, for her lineage and future offspring. Eli listened quietly, his hands resting on the rail. "I'll think on it," he said. But when the man rode away, he turned toward the pasture where Sparrow ran free, kicking up golden dust. Clara came to stand beside him. "You'll sell her?" she asked gently. Eli shook his head. "No, she's given me enough. She gave me back my life." Clara's hand slipped into his, not out of impulse, but out of understanding. No words followed. They stood that way as the sky turned to honey, watching Sparrow run against the wind. The town never stopped telling the story. Some said he became the richest man in the territory. Others said he turned it all away and lived quietly with the woman who once handed him a bottle of milk. But those who truly knew Eli Cartwright said the money never mattered, that the miracle wasn't gold or glory, but the stubborn grace of a small creature who refused to die, and the man who learned to live again beside her. And if you listen close, on calm evenings when the wind slides over the grass, you might still hear the echo of her hooves, steady, sure, free, because sometimes the world doesn't pay you back in silver or land. Sometimes it pays you in something far rarer, a second chance at hope.